If you ache for truth, goodness, and beauty, if you're hungry for a Christianity with substance and strength, if you long for a faith that's big and bold and biblical and all about Jesus Christ, if you're inspired by the idea of one church that has spanned 20 centuries, 24 time zones, and 2 hemispheres, enfolding every race, nation, and language, then you're considering Catholicism.
So, Ed, here we are sitting in the piney woods along the shore of the Great Lakes, and there's a breeze.
While the weather permits, here we are.
Yeah, and
soon enough.
But there's a breeze.
It is. It's wonderful.
I know it feels really, really good, and it's like the breeze is whispering.
I think one of us needs to run to the gas station and get pizza, and the other one we need to call our wives and say, "Just get over here."
Because there's this gas station a couple of miles up the road. So the listeners don't really know about this, but we're in the remote secret location. And there's, 2 miles up the road, there's this rural road, there's this gas station, and the gas station has pizza. It's like a convenience store there. And I discovered a number of years ago, it's pretty good pizza. So I often go get gas station pizza.
Last time we recorded, you brought pizza.
Yeah, gas station pizza.
And it was fantastic.
And we sat here in the woods and ate gas station pizza while we talked about Catholicism. And now we have the wind whispering through the pines, and the listeners will undoubtedly hear the wind whispering through the pines. Right. And we're going to talk about the kinds of things we normally talk about here with Ed the Protestant and I. And we're going to talk about something today that really is like a substantive issue in terms of Ed the Protestant and Greg the Catholic, which is we're going to talk about how to choose a church. Why don't you frame the conversation for us, Ed?
Well, it's all the buzz among my Protestant friends, and it has been for years. Which church do you go to? Oh, that's a really good church. I like their pastor over there. You should hear the music over at this church. Wow, they have a great kids program. And there's just this general feeling that you got to find the church that fits you. And that's the most important thing. And we could list all afternoon the things that the criteria for finding a church that fits you, right? The coffee.
Well, yeah. Okay. So let's put it this way: we've both been on both sides of this equation, maybe on all 3 sides of the equation. So we both have at different times in our life had to choose a church.
Yep.
Because whether you as before you were married, or you as your family said, hey, we've moved to a new town, or we're in this new community and we need to pick a church. And we've both been on church staff where it was our job to get more people, to attract more people to our particular...
To make our church better than the rest.
Well, yeah, to attract more people, right? So what do we have to do to get more people in the door here, kind of thing? Win people to our side, grow our church. So we've been on the sort of consumer side, and we've been on sort of the sales side of it, but also the advice giving side, because we both have people in our lives, friends, family members, whatever, who maybe they're not going to church now and would like to start, or maybe they have moved to a new town or whatever, and they want to pick a church. So the question becomes, now they're going to kind of go around and try this one and this one and this one and go up and down sort of the corners, in the town, and try the various churches. And the question is, what is the criteria? Like, how do you select a church?
Right.
And like I said, you and I have been on all sides of this equation. Right. And recently, somebody came to me and said, well, my wife and I, we're expecting kids, and we want our kids to grow up in the church. We haven't been going for the last few years. We kind of grew up in churches, but we haven't been going in the last couple of years, and we'd like to choose one. And so we've kind of gone to a few in the town, and we're not really sure how to pick one. And what advice do you have? So I said, hey, Ed, let's talk about this. What advice would we give to them about how to choose one?
Right. And I think you have to ask the right question. or you just end up bouncing around.
Let's talk about the premise behind the question, because I think behind that question there is a premise. And the premise is, at least with respect to Christianity, that all these churches are essentially the same thing, right? Like the substance. They all basically believe the same thing. They all believe in Jesus and God and Jesus and salvation.
Right.
And so the notion is that there is a kind of generic Christianity, a sort of baseline generic Christianity that runs through all of them.
Right.
And so you're going to get more or less the same thing. The difference is it's like you go to the grocery store and you go to the cereal aisle.
Right.
Right. And here, like, is 40 feet of cereal.
Right.
Right. 40 linear shelf.
That could be the name of my autobiography.
40 linear feet of shelf space of cereal. And, I suppose if you took all of this stuff and put it in a beaker in a lab, it all is probably the same stuff. It's all the same, vitamins, minerals, and chemicals. But all of the different cereals have been shaped and formed into sort of different shapes, textures, colors, and flavors. And so you essentially ask, well, it's all going to be essentially the same thing. Which is the one that I like the most?
Right.
Which shape, color, taste best suits me? And so that's the premise that's behind the question. How do I choose which brand of cereal or which brand of church to go to? And I think we want to look at that premise.
Yeah, we need to challenge the premise, right? That sort of sums up my lifelong drifting from one church to the next. Maybe
for those listeners who haven't heard over the last 135 episodes your evolution, why don't you just real quickly tell us, because you have been through this.
I have. If you actually want to hear me lay it all out, it was episode 7, which was the first one I was in. But I was a Baptist, raised up in the Baptist church, but that didn't seem like it had enough oomph to me. I got involved in the charismatic church next after that, sort of generic charismatic church, not Assembly of God, not Pentecostal, just generic. And that was probably another 16 or 17 years. And then I got, that seemed weird and wonky to me. So that wasn't right. So I ended up in the church growth movement, like the Willow Creek Saddleback Church movement for another 16 or 17 doing. And I worked for a big church doing music. And for a lot of the time, it felt like, man, this is it. This is what I'm doing. And then, I soured on that because it really wasn't what I was looking for. And then you and I were in the hipster groovy church for a while. And
in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, there was this kind of thing that was hot for a while of like the coffee house hipster church. And we were both part of this kind of hipster coffee house vibe. A thing in a downtown area with college students and all this. And
And so I ended up working off and on I spent 10 or 12 years doing that. And then I led worship at a couple of small churches, a couple of years here and there. But I don't like this. I don't like this theology. I don't like this. I don't like that. And it led me to a big restlessness that you saw and challenged me on and said, I think maybe you need to come and talk to me about Catholicism. And I thought at the time, maybe he's right. At least that's an avenue I haven't gone down. And, so now over the last, that was I've been in the podcast since March of last year. So it's been, 14, 16 months, whatever. I've come a long ways.
We get listener emails, and I love to get the emails from our listeners. Greg at consideringcatholicism.com or just consideringcatholicism@gmail.com. And I love your stories, but Ed, you have fans. There's people who say, man, I love hearing Ed's story and watching or listening to his evolution. And there's a lot of people who've written and said, I'm exactly where Ed is. Like Ed is me.
I think it's very common.
Yeah.
Which is why I feel like I need to speak my mind, because I think I represent a ton of people.
Well, you do. And for me too, I mean, I've been through this journey. So I I encountered Christianity first through campus ministries as a college student.
Yeah.
And this was, these kind of non-denominational evangelical campus ministries. So Campus Crusade and InterVarsity and Navigators. And the first churches that I went to, or, went for a Sunday or something to during that time, were like these contemporary Jesus movement churches. So like Calvary Chapel, very first church I ever walked into for a worship service was Calvary Chapel. And a lot of the people that, which was a big thing back in the 70s and 80s in California. And, the first people I met in campus ministry was all Calvary Chapel stuff. But then, church shopped all through college and whatever, and, went to a Lutheran church and a Baptist church and this church and that church, and, tried them all. Kind of as a college student, went to different churches looking for girls. Right. Like when you're a college guy, you're like, well, let's go check this. And are there any girls there, and our age? And, but went around, more seriousness, went around and tried to understand all of them, because I was a history of philosophy major. And so, I had some, kind of knowledge and background of this. And so I was trying to figure it out, and, ended up in a Reformed Calvinist denomination, went to seminary, committed to working in that as an ordained pastor for 10 years, and then went out and got into Christian publishing and worked as a consultant and traveled all around the world and all around the U.S., just sort of consulting with Christian authors and pastors and churches about, how to grow their churches and publish their ideas and do all these things. And so in that context, I've met like every stripe of church and in the Christian world in America and South America and Europe and Asia and whatever. And then ended up, making a decision to enter the Catholic Church. So I guess like all that's to validate this journey where, both Ed and I think a lot of people do what's church shopping. Right. And we've sort of bounced around and shopped around.
I had this list in my head, do I like the preaching? Do I think that pastor is a good speaker? Molly and I went to one church where we loved the music, and I thought, that guy's talking to me like I'm in sixth grade. I can't sit through this every week. And then we'd go someplace where, do I like how it makes me feel? Is this exciting and new, like the Love Boat,
But what runs through what you just said? What runs through all that? What's the common denominator?
My own happiness, me. Yeah.
Does this suit me? It is back to the cereal aisle in the grocery store. Right. And I go up and down and I go, here's Crunch Berries. I used to like the Captain Crunch, the peanut butter Captain Crunch. Right. But you can go, then there's the Raisin Bran, and you get super healthy and go to the Great Nuts, so you can do it. Right. But, at the end of the day, I'm just shopping for the thing that is the color, texture, taste that I like.
Right. And it's
with the assumption that it's all going to have about the same nutritional value.
Right. And then if I find the magic combination, there we go.
Yeah.
But I never found it. And I got tired of looking, and I got disillusioned about it, and you said something many years ago when you preached in the Hipster Groovy Church, where I was, volunteering on stage playing my guitar, that you said to me privately, you said, the thing I like about the Catholic Church is that God is big and I am little. And it's the opposite way around in the Protestant church, and that you don't change God to suit yourself. You change yourself to suit God. And how can I, if I'm church shopping for personal reasons, how can I find someplace where I can be told and taught and discipled into changing myself to fit God, when they're constantly asking me, how could they change God so that I would like him?
Right. I mean, G.K. Chesterton says something, I don't know the exact quote, but something to the effect of, Catholicism is a recognition that, or having the humility to admit that you aren't particularly important. Right. Right. And there's something that's bigger than you, and there's people that are smarter than you, and they have been for 2,000 years, and that you're sort of a small part of something bigger, and you aren't, you're important to God, but you aren't particularly important. It isn't about you.
Right.
But let's go back to this thing for our listeners, who, some of them, if they're listening to this podcast, then I assume that they're considering Catholicism.
Right.
And maybe they or their friends or family are going, well, how do I just pick a church, right? So what is the criteria? So you move to a town,
right,
or you get married, or you're going to have kids, or whatever this there's some like a life change
right,
that occurs that says, well, either I haven't been going to church, or I'm dissatisfied where I am, and I've got to choose a new church. So what criteria do I apply? And you mentioned a lot of the common criteria. So I say, well, okay, where are there people who are like me?
Right.
Right? People of my
right.
age, temperament, economic class, right? Tastes, So you can a lot of times tell that when you drive into a parking lot, you go, the way that people dress and look in the cars, and
sure.
You walk in and you go, I fit in here. Like these people are similar to me. Like that's like the first thing. Nobody wants to go somewhere you stand out and you feel like out of place, right? So that the first question is, well, where do I feel like I fit in?
Yep.
I'm one of the crowd.
Yeah.
And then you typically will walk in, and we had, oh my goodness, when I was a consultant in the church growth world, we had all this data on how people choose churches, at least at that time, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, like survey data, pulse groups, all this stuff, right? Like, I mean, you have all these surveys and pulse group stuff, but it was that there was one I remember where they had all this data that they said, if a couple goes to church, men choose the church based on the quality of the sermon, or whatever, and women choose it on the quality of the bathrooms.
Oh, well, there we go.
Because if men go in there and they feel like this guy talked and it was intellectually satisfying, this all seems like incredibly sexist to me. I'm not sure I really want to go there, but that women go there, and if the bathrooms were clean and nice, they want to go there. It seems like condescending and patronizing and sexist. But maybe there was something to some of that. But but they also like the music.
Sure.
The music seemed really whatever in whatever way, shape, or form. I liked it, or it was funny, or it was right, or like how many times in that world you and I mean, when I was working in the mega church world, we put Starbucks franchises in the lobby.
Sure,
you literally did. I mean, you had a mega church, you call Starbucks, just like they have the Starbucks that go in a grocery store.
Yep,
you call those people that's sort of a division of Starbucks, and you put a Starbucks franchise in the lobby. And people come and they go, look, there's Starbucks. I can pick up a Starbucks, and I can do this, and I can wander into the bookstore, and they've got T-shirts, or they've got, I remember the ones where, they'd put a skateboard park inside the building so you could drop your little middle schoolers off, and they could skateboard while you got your Starbucks and went and heard the preacher and the band, and, So there's 1,000 of these things that they did to sort of appeal to you, much in the same way that the cereal on the grocery aisle tries to connect with various consumers.
And this was there were a whole ton. Now that I've been thinking about this for a couple of years, there were all these turning points. But here was one. I was one small church I worked for doing worship. They brought in a consultant, and he said, among all the other things he suggested, he said that, you have to remember that young people, and he had a Gen Z, I don't know.
I lost track of them all.
Yeah. And they can't all be, we've got like 16 or 17 of those. They can't all have been in the last 50 years. That's not a generation. Anyway.
Get off my lawn.
That's right.
Kids.
Yeah, that's right. He said, remember that these young people, 20 somethings, I think, consider truth to be their truth. And they're looking for their truth, and not your truth, but their truth. And I raised my hand and I said, okay, but surely you can't be saying that we will tell them that whatever they want to believe, they can. That's not why you go to a church. And he said, and his answer was a little bit vague. Well, no, we want to, we want to make sure they hear the gospel, but we have to keep in mind. And I think that this is a back way of getting into what it is we're talking about here. And that is, I remember sitting there thinking, I want to know what the truth is. And
right. I mean, okay. So right? Like we said a minute ago, like the grocery store cereal aisle,
Right.
there's a premise, and maybe, just maybe, that premise, at least within American evangelicalism, dates back to some time 50, 60, 70 years ago when you could say, you could go to any town USA, some kind of, classic town in the Midwest,
Right.
and you kind of walk into any town USA and there's, 20 churches in town. On this corner is a Presbyterian church. On the opposite corner is a Lutheran church. On the other corner is the Baptist church and the Episcopalian church and whatever. And everybody's a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and everybody, works
Right.
at the local factory or farms. And, we're all neighbors and really, we're all, Christians, and we all have sort of a baseline. We all believe in Jesus, that Jesus was the Son of God, and, he rose on the third day, and, right. And everybody believes you shouldn't cheat on your wife and you should pay your taxes.
Right.
Right. I mean, so this is a broad consensus.
Right.
Right. And then it became, the differences were differences of flavor and texture. Right. So
Right.
the Baptists, they like to stomp about and
Right.
sing a certain way. And then the Presbyterians are a little more reserved. And the
Right.
Lutherans, the guy wears a robe and, whatever. Right. And so there were these kind of minor sort of stylistic differences, but there was a basic kind of core consensus. But here's the thing. For me, the first question, the first criteria is whether that church represents the truth.
Yeah.
And not my truth. It's
Right.
and that really is a prior philosophical thing, right? The difference between sort of the postmodern world,
Right.
and sort of the classical world, the notion that there's objective truth.
Right.
So 2 + 2 = 4. It just
Yeah.
does. If you think it equals 5, then you're wrong.
Right.
And that, that went out the door, because now we can't say what a woman is.
Right.
Right? I mean, we literally can't say 2 + 2 = 4 anymore. I mean, the woke stuff, or,
Yep.
the whatever, cultural Marxism that tells you 2 + 2 can equal whatever it is. And a woman is a whatever, and there's 74 genders of, and
Right.
you can't believe anything, and there's no objective truth. And so we've come into a philosophical place as a society where the notion that there is objective truth is largely scorned. But there is objective truth. That's all, right?
Right.
So the question is, for me, if I'm going to choose a church, as much as I want to choose one that I feel like I have something in common with the people,
Right.
and we all share similar, we drive similar cars and wear similar clothes and have socioeconomic class, and we all like the sort of same music, and the pastor is
Right.
connects with us all, blah, 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 blah. As much as I want those to be the criteria, let me hypothesize, or let me, formulate a hypothesis where you're a scenario where you have church A and church B.
Right.
Okay. So I moved to a town, and in church A, everybody kind of looks like me or is very similar to me in the sense that, we have all this stuff in common.
Right.
And I pull into the parking lot and feel like, oh man, all these people can be my buddies. And I walk in, the bathrooms are clean, of course,
Right.
for my
Gotta have it.
wife. But I walk in, and whatever it is that, sort of, gets my jollies, rings my bell, scratches my itch musically.
Right.
The music is
Right.
right, what I like. And the pastor, whoever he is somebody who, is appealing to me, and his sermons are good, right? So basically everything about this church from the standpoint of how it appeals to me or
Right.
connects with me is A+. Okay?
Yep.
But this church believes that Xanadu the alien, right? Who
Okay, I'd go there once.
that Xanadu the alien formed life on Earth, and they have 3 extra books in the Bible,
Right.
and they, I don't know, want to sacrifice the virgins in the
Right.
volcano or something, right? or they teach some, whatever. And then there's Church B. And Church B has a bunch of people across the street. And Church B has a bunch of people who don't look like me. They are either older than I am, or they're younger than I am, or they're of different socioeconomic class, or they speak a different language, or they dress differently, or they wear different kinds of cars, whatever. I do not fit in. And the music is not to my taste. It's not the kind of music I would listen to in the car. And the pastor or whatever is just like not a person that I feel like warm fuzzies about.
Right.
What he preaches, I'm convinced, is the absolute truth of the ages and the truth of Christianity.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And the teachings of this church and its doctrines and practices go back to the first century apostles.
Right.
And are consistent with everything that Peter and Paul and James and John, took from Jesus and handed down. Now, what I've described is in many ways your typical Catholic parish.
Right.
Because you're going to go to your typical Catholic parish. And there was once a British convert, I think in the 19th century, who was some kind of a British aristocrat. And he decided to convert from the Church of England to Catholicism. And I can't remember the details of the story, but it goes something like this. His mother said, "Oh, but dear, when you go to Mass, you'll be kneeling next to the help."
Right.
To the servants, right? And you go, I know. And so I go in here and I go, these people, they're all kind of like, I don't. So I go to this Catholic parish and I go, you know what? There's people who are poorer than me and richer than me, and they drive different cars than I do, and they're this and they're that, and they speak different languages, and I don't really fit in or connect. And the music, there's an organ or there's a this, and they play songs, and I listen to, country pop in the car or whatever. And then the pastor is kind of mumbles in the sermon, and nobody sticks around and gives me coffee and during coffee and donuts and chats me up. And, so there's your typical Catholic parish, whereas across the street is, the hip, groovy church of Xanadu worshiping, whatever. Yeah. Right? So the question is, which one do you choose? Because if your criteria is going to be about where you fit in and where you feel comfortable, you're going to choose the weird Xanadu alien worshiping church across the street because it's got the hip and groovy pastor and the great band and the bathrooms and the Starbucks and the this, and you fit in, or whatever it is. And the Catholic parish across the street is going to seem weird. The difference is the Catholic parish, in my opinion, the faith, the gospel was once and for all given to the saints, to the apostles, down through the ages.
Well, if I want to find a club, there's no lack of clubs I could find to join that suit me, right? And this is, but that doesn't make it a church. And I'm not interested in joining a club I'm not interested in joining a church like I would join a club. I want to know what the truth is, and my search for all of this, all my life, I'm in a couple of weeks I will turn an age that I don't even want to say out loud.
A certain age.
A man of a certain age. Right? I catch my reflection in the store window and I think, there's an old guy following me. Where was I going with this? As I get older, I want to know what all this is, what the real truth is, and I want to go someplace where they'll tell it to me, and I can choose. I want to know what the truth is, and I'm not interested anymore in the trappings if the truth isn't there. I'm not interested in making this be. If you're looking for a church and those other things are the most important thing, then you're looking for a club, in my opinion. You're not looking for a church. And this is what over the last year and a half or two, Catholicism has never, as I've investigated it, Catholicism has never misstepped, in my opinion, when it comes to the truth. And then go home thinking, no, I don't think that's right.
Oh, okay, but it's a hard sell. So I know for a fact that you have people in your life in your home,
Right.
For whom it is a hard sell to say, let's go over to Saint so-and-so's parish.
Right.
Because the moment you pull into the parking lot, okay, so it was a few years ago, I invited some people who are evangelicals, go to a very cool evangelical church or whatever, and I invited them to come to Mass with me. And they were gracious enough to say, okay, I'll take you up on the invitation and come and see what it is. And I remember feeling like cringe.
Right.
Like feeling this cringe from the time that they pulled into the parking lot, because I know them.
Right.
And I spent enough time in that world, my whole life in that world, that I was sort of seeing it through their eyes.
Yep.
And I knew from the moment they pulled into the parking lot that everything was wrong. Right?
Right.
Like everything was just wrong. And they were being nice enough to sit through this, but I could just tell from the time they pulled into the parking lot, from the architecture, from they walked into the building, to the people around them, from the time that the music started, to when the priest walked down, who the priest was, how the whole Mass unfolded, the stand up, sit down, the songs, and this and that,
the whole thing,
right? The whole 9 yards. It was an interesting experience because I was sitting next to them in the pew and I was sort of seeing it through their eyes, because I'd only been a Catholic, entered the church a few years before. And so I could still see it through their, contemporary evangelical eyes. And I was like, this is a train wreck.
Right.
For them.
Well, this brings up,
well, I like this is a train wreck for them. Like everything is wrong from their perspective. So anyway, we finished. They're nice, shake hands, blah, 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 thanks for coming, whatever, and and then I run into them, or I see them a week or so later, and I say, so what'd you think when you came to Saint so-and-so's to the Mass? And they're like, well, they were honest. They said, well, now I know I don't want to become Catholic.
Right.
Because it was just sort of like kind of yucky from their perspective. And I felt so bad.
Right.
Because through their eyes, applying their criteria to it, everything, with their baked in assumptions and premises was off-putting.
Well, this shines a light on how I have always thought I had to proselytize or evangelize, because I realize now that I was always thinking, I want these people that I know that aren't Christians, and I wish they were, and I wish they would connect with God, and I have to bring them. I'd like to bring them to my church, but it's got to be cool enough.
Yeah.
Right. So if I join the Catholic Church, that's all gone. So what am I? What's now? What now? What do I say now? How do I help my unsaved friends approach God? How do I do that? That's an entirely different thing, and it shows that I was basing it on my being able to sell it based on cultural.
Well, yes, sell it on the packaging and the experience, right? So when somebody tells you, hey, there's a new movie out, or there's a new restaurant in town, and you go check it out, you go, well, it checked all the boxes. I really liked it.
Right.
And again, it's sort of applying this consumer criteria to it. And if you apply contemporary, postmodern, global consumer culture, you apply that criteria, you see it through that lens, the Catholic Church is not going to look appealing. I told you before we started the recorder, at one point in our life, we lived in a town where there were a lot of Mormons for a few years. And they were some of our neighbors were just the nicest people. I mean, great families, husband, wife, kids. They mowed their lawn and washed their cars, and their kids were well behaved. I mean, just really wonderful people. And I remember friends like, well, man, these Mormons around us are just the greatest people. Like, Mormonism must be really fantastic. And I go, I know, but I mean, do you know what believes, and like Joseph Smith and the thing, and the American
Yeah.
Indians are the lost tribe of the Hebrews, and yada yada.
Right.
And I said all that. They go, well, that just sounds crazy. These people wouldn't believe anything crazy. And besides, I don't know. That's just stuff in books. Like, I just know these are great people, and it must be a great
Right.
thing because these are great people. I go, I know, but I can't worship something that I don't believe is true. And at the end of the day, Christianity comes down to believing that not only that Jesus died and rose again, but that
Right.
he handed off to his apostles.
Right.
He commissioned them, the Great Commission, go into all nations, right? This is the end of the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus says, go into all nations and make disciples, baptizing them and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded. And I'm with you to the end of the age. And he gave that instruction to his apostles. And so the question is, for me, how do I get back? And that was the question for me that brought me to Catholicism, is how do I most authentically get back to
Right.
the church that traces its roots back, that is authentically founded on the apostles? And that brought me to Roman Catholicism. Now, is that easy to sell to my evangelical friends? Is that easy to say to the young couple that says to me, hey, we're having a baby and we haven't gone to church in years, but we think, we want to raise our kids.
Right.
So we're trying to choose a church and help us to find one. And what should we choose? And they say, we went over to church A and B and we liked this one and we didn't like this one. And then we went to this Saint so-and-so's and, I don't know, we didn't really like the music and the priest seemed a little this or that.
Right.
And it seems like we don't understand it. And, not all the people were like us, or they were older than us, or they were younger than us, or they were poorer than us, or they were richer than us, or whatever, And how do I sell it? And I think that's the question is, well, I can't sell it based on those consumer criteria.
Right. Well, and you shouldn't be selling it at all. Not in
Right.
that sense.
Right. Right. I mean, I think what I have to say to someone is you have to do your due diligence.
Yes.
And that's what this podcast has been about now for 130 something episodes and that's why we called the podcast Considering Catholicism, because it is for those who are considering whether Catholicism is valid and is a valid choice. And for 130 something episodes, we've been trying to make the case, and will continue to, that Catholicism is authentic and valid, and you have to not going to win for a lot of people, and nor should it try to win.
Right.
Now, I can say that, except that every now and then it stuns people because someone goes to visit one of the great cathedrals. They go to Europe and they walk into Chartres Cathedral and
Right.
they're overwhelmed by the beauty, or they're overwhelmed by some of this, and it touches the beauty and the goodness and the truth touches
Right.
them. And that is true. And, but if it comes down to sort of competing in the postmodern consumer marketplace, I'm not sure. Well, I'm not sure. I know that Catholicism shouldn't, or Catholic parishes shouldn't try to
Right.
descend into that sort of competition with the other churches on the corner.
If I don't like the music, if I like the music at a church and then they get a different music director and I don't like the music, here I go again. And I don't want to do that anymore.
Well, when we in previous episodes, when I took you to a mass and we talked about music and liturgy, the reason why the liturgy is the way it is because it's the right thing to do, and it's
Right.
based on biblical principles and ancient principles, and right. I mean, we've unpacked why the liturgy. So there isn't a creative team that sits around and tries to pick the 5 best songs.
Right.
It is based on a liturgy.
Right.
A liturgical things based on scripture and ancient practices. And so in a sense, it's trying to do the right thing. The homily isn't like, let's do a 7-part series on,
Right.
what was it? You and I were laughing about some big mega church that this summer is doing their series is, Summer at the Movies. And so
Right.
every week the pastor is going to talk about some, the Barbie movie or the Oppenheimer movie or
Right.
whatever the hot movie is, and somehow try to make a sermon out of it.
Right.
No, what you're going to have is the readings that come from the ancient lectionary
Right.
And you're going to have the homily or the teaching based on those readings. You're going to have the prayers that are based on this structure. And the question is, what's valid? What's truth? And so, we always talk about truth, goodness, and beauty, and these are all paths. And there is beauty in the Catholic Church.
Yep.
There's beauty in the Mass, and there is goodness in it, and there is truth in it. And those are the criteria you have to apply. Does this partake of the beautiful? Not do I find it beautiful, but does it partake of the eternal beauty of God in the church?
Right.
And does it represent eternal truth? And, for a lot of people go, how do I know that? Well, you have to do the work.
Yeah.
You have to listen to this podcast, watch videos, talk to people, right? I mean, a lot of people are just not going to invest that much effort into it.
No, from the outside, it's going to look like pointy hats and people kneeling and sitting up. It's not, you can't know from looking at it from the outside.
Yeah. So for those who, are listening to this podcast, part of the reason for it is to give you reasons.
Right.
To give you reasons to consider that Catholicism is true and valid.
I'll throw this out here too. If you're a Protestant and you're struggling with this, and you want to email back and forth or talk a little bit with me, I'd be glad. Well, this is what I think.
Send it, and Ed'll jump in. You can send it to Greg at consideringcatholicism.com or just consideringcatholicism@gmail.com. Say you've got a question for Ed or a question, you'd like to have us address, or, the same thing for Corey or anything else, but send it our way. And we'll take those things on, or we'll send you a private response or whatever.
Yeah.
But look, these are hard things and these are hard times, and it takes discernment of truth. And so what I would say to that young couple right now is like, well, I kind of just want to pick a church, as soon as possible. And can you make the decision easy? I mean, on one hand, I would say, well, you can make it easy because I think Roman Catholicism is true. We did an episode way back about you and Corey and I, where we talked about G.K. Chesterton's famous essay.
I was thinking about it.
Why I'm a Catholic. And the first sentence of it is he says, well, there are 10, if you ask me why I became a Catholic, I could give you 10,000 reasons, but they all boil down to, in some form or another, because Catholicism is true.
Yeah.
I just believe it's true. And so the thing is Chesterton said that, I think that's the deal. Now, for somebody to go, how do I know that? Well, you're going to have to do the work.
Right.
You're going to have to listen to this podcast. You're going to have to read some books. You're going to have to watch some videos. You're going to have to ask some wise people. You're going to have to do some discernment. But that discernment is going to be based on the premise, the conviction that 2 + 2 does equal 4, that there is objective truth.
That you can know.
Yeah, there is objective truth. And that in choosing a church, it's a search for the truth.
Yeah, if you're convinced that there is a God, you have to know that it is in your best interest to find out what He's all about.
Now, that being said, you do want to find beauty and goodness.
Yep.
And you can, and it's not an excuse for parishes not to try to represent the beautiful and the good. But you may have to adapt your understandings of what is beautiful and good, rather than the church sort of adapting or condescending to your notions of beauty and goodness. And that takes that humility.
Yep.
As we said earlier, the humility of recognizing that somehow this isn't about you. In Catholicism, the ultimate acceptance that there's something that's bigger and truer and gooder and more beautiful than you, and that in the giant scheme of things, you as an individual aren't terribly important. And if you think that is crushing to your ego, well, because really what that should be is the comfort of humility.
Yeah, I love the feeling of feeling small.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Well, thanks, Ed.
Stuff.
All right, good stuff. Bye.
Thank you for listening. My name is Greg Smith. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, would you please hit the like and subscribe buttons wherever you get your podcasts? And please share it with others. And if you're curious about the Catholic worldview and faith, the Church and its saints, or Catholic history, culture, and art, then visit consideringcatholicism.com. And email me to let me know what you think. Greg at consideringcatholicism.com. www.thebrightlight.com.